In the fading embers of a world torn apart by war, buried beneath decades of secrecy, lies a shadow archive of the 20th century. Classified operations, erased names and missions never meant to be remembered. Records that slipped between the cracks of victory and defeat. From the ruins of Dresden to the frozen plains of Siberia, evidence of covert alliances, hidden experiments, and forbidden technologies has surfaced. These are not tales of soldiers or generals, but of silence, concealment, and the unending war to control truth itself. Somewhere within the sealed vaults of forgotten intelligence lies the story of what was never supposed to be found. Chapter 1. Operation Eclipse. The Vanishing of Dresden Files. February 13th, 1945. At precisely 22:03 hours, the first wave of Lancaster bombers from RAF Bomber Command crossed into Saxony airspace. Dresden, once called the Florence of the Elbe, became the target of Operation Thunderclap, a raid so devastating that it would later be described as both a military necessity and a war crime. Beneath the rising firestorm, while entire districts collapsed into molten ash, a smaller and lesser-known convoy moved quietly through the city's southern perimeter. It bore the insignia of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, the RSHA, the Central Intelligence Office of Nazi Germany, and its mission name, scribbled hastily in courier logs recovered decades later, was Eclipse. The Eclipse convoy consisted of 6 vehicles, 4 Opel Blitz transports, 1 Horsch command car, and a final armoured Bussing-Nag truck carrying sealed aluminum canisters marked Vertraulich, Patrauen Sie die Best Reims, 77Z. The lead officer, identified in fragmentary personnel files as SS Sturmbannführer Otto Rehmer, had orders signed by none other than Ernst Kaltenbrunner, chief of the RSHA. The directive was clear: secure and evacuate the Dresden archive before Allied forces breached Saxony. What the archive contained remains uncertain, but declassified British field intelligence notes from 1952 suggest its relevance extended far beyond war records. A memo titled SRG INT 7-115 Eclipse describes microfilm containing documents pertaining to post-surrender agreements, industrial transfers, and ongoing biotechnical research, classified under Directive 77Z. At 23:17 hours, local police radio captured a brief transmission from the convoy's escort platoon, Schattenkolonne proceeding to checkpoint Tauscher, cargo secured. No subsequent transmission was ever logged. When Soviet troops entered Dresden days later, they found no sign of the vehicles, the officers, or the archive. The official German records list them as vermisst, missing in action. For years, the event was dismissed as another casualty of chaos, until the British National Archives released a batch of declassified OSS memoranda. One, dated May 3, 1945, described an intercepted report from an American reconnaissance pilot flying over Bavaria. The pilot noted a civilian convoy moving south at high speed, each truck painted over with neutral markings. The vehicles vanished near Mittenwald. At the Austrian border, the Americans assumed they were stragglers fleeing the front, but a later interrogation transcript, found in a 1951 US Counterintelligence Corps file, records the testimony of an SS driver captured near Innsbruck. We were told to go to Switzerland. The cargo was for negotiation, not destruction. When asked what the cargo contained, the prisoner only said, "Truths the Reich could not allow to die." For a time, that single phrase was all historians had. Then, in 1974, a retired CIA archivist named Warren L. Pike unearthed a box labeled Eclipse Detrans 48 from an off-site storage facility in Maryland. Inside were carbon copies of internal memos referencing missing canisters believed to contain microfilm from the RSHA's Abteilung Sixen, the Foreign Intelligence Office. One memo, dated October 1946, noted the recovery of 2 such canisters from a Swiss customs seizure near Basel. The contents were immediately classified and handed to the State Department. Their titles, however, were logged: Directive 77Z, Strategic Continuity Framework, and Transfer Dossiers, Industrial and Scientific Assets. Western Allies. Neither has been declassified to this day. The implications were staggering. Strategic continuity suggested planning beyond the Reich's defeat, an organized effort to ensure that Nazi industrial, scientific, and intelligence networks survived the collapse. This aligns disturbingly well with Operation Paperclip, the post-war American program that recruited German scientists. But Eclipse's references go further. The Swiss Customs Manifest listed several attached files concerning transnational investment channels and humanitarian cover organizations in Argentina, Chile, and South Africa. In short, a financial and logistical blueprint for the post-war exodus of Nazi wealth and personnel. Even now, historians argue over whether Operation Eclipse was sanctioned by Hitler himself or orchestrated independently by Himmler's circle. A diary fragment belonging to SS Brigadeführer Walter Schellenberg, discovered in 1981, mentions a final evacuation mission southbound, designed to protect men of knowledge and documents of value. The entry, dated February 11, 1945, 2 days before the Dresden bombing, reads simply, "The sun will set in ashes. Eclipse must move beneath it." In the years that followed, sightings and rumors multiplied. Argentine police archives contain post-war reports of German nationals arriving in Buenos Aires in late 1945, carrying diplomatic letters from the Swiss legation. One name appears repeatedly: O. Raymer. Whether this was the same Otto Raymer who led the convoy is uncertain, but the pattern fits the larger migration of Nazi intelligence officers to South America. The most chilling aspect, however, comes from a single American intelligence memorandum discovered in 2004, heavily redacted but bearing the subject. Line Eclipse Contact, 1952. It describes a confidential meeting in Madrid between US agents and a former RSHA officer offering access to archival materials of strategic value. The memo ends with 3 words: acquisition not achieved. So where did the Dresden files go? No canisters, no film, no survivors. A British engineer named Harold Selby, who worked with the Ministry of Defence in the 1960s, told an interviewer that he once saw fragments of the Eclipse documents, references to undisclosed pre-surrender agreements concerning Western industrial interests in occupied Europe. When asked why the documents were never released, Selby answered, "Because both sides wanted them buried." Today, the only physical trace of Eclipse comes from a photograph held by the Bundesarchiv, taken by an unknown German soldier in February 1945. It shows a snow-covered road near Freiburg. 6 trucks, unmarked, headlights dimmed, move in convoy formation. The caption, handwritten on the reverse, reads, "Letzte Fahrt der Schatten," the last journey of the shadows. Historians can only piece together fragments, the directives, the missing officers, the vanished archive. But the timing, the precision, and the continuing suppression of related files suggests something far larger than a lost convoy. Operation Eclipse may have been the final calculated move of a dying regime, ensuring its influence would outlive its downfall. The Reich's flames consumed cities, but its secrets survived in microfilm, in numbered accounts, and in men who quietly exchanged uniforms for suits. In one of the declassified British cables from 1953, a single line remains unredacted. It reads, "The Eclipse material is considered permanently sensitive. Its exposure would compromise both Allied and post-war operations. Whatever was inside those canisters, it was never meant to be found. And if it still exists, hidden in some private collection, or locked in a vault beneath Zurich, it remains the unclosed wound of a century that refused to bury its ghosts." Chapter 2. The Iron Sea, Britain's Forgotten Fleet. On March 19, 1944, the Royal Navy logged an anomaly in its North Sea records. 2 patrol trawlers, HMS Archeron and HMS Pikefield, recorded sonar echoes that did not correspond to any known Allied or Axis submarine pattern. The signature, flat, metallic, unidentifiable, was reported to the Admiralty and quietly suppressed under Class A Black Record Experimental. What neither crew realized at the time was that the signal belonged not to an enemy vessel, but to one of their own, an unacknowledged component of a project known only as the Iron Sea Initiative. The Iron Sea files, unearthed in 1989 by a retired intelligence officer, describe a covert naval program operating from Scapa Flow between 1943 and 1945. Overseen by Rear Admiral Sir Lionel Hastings under the Office of Naval Research, its purpose was to test prototype radar-resistant hull coatings and self-masking magnetic arrays, precursors to what modern engineers would call stealth technology. The fleet itself comprised 8 modified corvettes and 2 submarines disguised as fishing trawlers, stripped of registration and bearing no official ensign. Their names never appeared on any naval registry, but fragments of code words, Aegir, Narwhal, Wraith, recur throughout internal communique marked Sea Iron P04. By night, the ships departed from Orkney under blackout orders, heading toward the Norwegian coast to intercept and test detection ranges against German radar installations. According to one decrypted MI6 cable dated April 2, 1944, Operation Iron Sea exercise is successful. Radar returns indicate full absorption at frequencies 3.1 to 7.5 centimeters. The same cable notes ominously, crew morale unstable, reports of compass deviation and auditory disorientation. The strange physiological side effects, severe nausea, hallucinations, even cases of partial amnesia, became recurring themes in the Iron Sea logs, leading to speculation that the new materials interfered with magnetic fields and human neurology alike. Officially, nothing like Iron Sea ever existed. Yet, within a month of those trials, Norwegian fishermen reported seeing ghost ships off the Lofoten Islands, vessels that appeared solid one moment and vanished the next. Royal Navy intelligence dismissed these accounts as wartime hysteria, but declassified Soviet naval records from 1957 tell a different story. One logbook from the submarine K-19 describes an unknown British craft operating in the area. Silent, radar transparent, yet visible through periscope optics. The Soviets labeled the encounter as foreign experimental technology, possible countermeasure research. By June 1944, Operation Overlord was underway and Iron Sea was ordered to stand down. Most of its ships were to be dismantled, their components destroyed or repurposed. But the logs end abruptly. The last entry, made on June 27th, reads, "Fleet redirected to Quadrant B14 for final evaluation. Standing orders, no communication, no identification until completion. From that point, all traces vanish. There are no decommission records, no crew lists, no insurance payouts. For decades, the North Sea held its silence. Then, in 1963, an oil exploration company operating near Trondheim discovered twisted metal debris embedded in the seabed, British hull plating of an alloy unknown to post-war engineers. Samples were quietly seized by the Ministry of Defence within 48 hours. The official statement, routine clearance of wartime wreckage. But an internal memo to the Admiralty, later leaked, described the find as consistent with Iron Sea composition patterns and noted the presence of electromagnetic field anomalies in the surrounding area. One of the engineers involved in the recovery, Harold Merrick, would later describe in an unpublished memoir how compasses malfunctioned near the wreck site and how his team's radio equipment picked up an untraceable transmission. Just 3 words repeated in a mechanical voice. Signal incomplete. Return. Merrick's notes were confiscated, and he was bound by the Official Secrets Act until his death in 1985. The secrecy surrounding Iron Sea deepened during the Cold War. In 1971, a US Navy intelligence report, Project Wraith Analysis, referenced British experiments involving magnetic field displacement hulls and sonar nullification, stating that initial designs were lost in an unexplained naval incident during 1944. The report drew a direct connection between those British trials and the later American Sea shadow stealth ship of the 1980s, implying a hidden technological lineage that had never been acknowledged publicly. Eyewitness accounts add another layer of unease. Former sailor Thomas Reeve, one of the few surviving crewmen from HMS Pikefield, described an unauthorized night patrol on April 15, 1944. "We were told to maintain absolute radio silence," he recalled in a 1978 interview. "We passed through a fog bank that glowed like phosphorus but no light source. When we emerged, our radar screens were blank, dead. We could see our sister ship just off the bow, but she wasn't there on the instruments. It was like she'd slipped into another layer of sea." His testimony, long dismissed as a sailor's tale, gained weight when declassified files revealed an identical description from another ship's engineer, recorded the same night. What makes the Iron Sea story truly unsettling is not the missing ships, but the official reaction. For 40 years, any mention of the initiative in academic or naval circles was met with categorical denial. In 1989, British journalist Peter Donnelly filed a Freedom of Information request for records pertaining to the Iron Sea initiative. The Ministry of Defence replied curtly, No such program exists within naval history. 2 months later, Donnelly received an anonymous package containing a photograph of a rusted hull, unmarked but unmistakably British in design, lying half-buried on a seabed. Written on the back, in faded ink, "Wraith found." The implications of I&C extend beyond lost technology. A recently declassified NATO briefing from 1958 suggests that portions of the recovered alloy were reverse-engineered and used in early radar-absorbing materials for aircraft. This would place Britain's experiments nearly 3 decades ahead of official stealth developments. But why was such a breakthrough buried? The same briefing hints that the process of generating magnetic field distortion required intense electrical output, creating localized interference fields that affected human perception, causing hallucinations, time loss, and, in one recorded case, psychosis among crewmen. The Admiralty classified these incidents as field-induced disorientation, though sailors whispered another name, the iron fog. For them, the sea itself had turned against them, a living metal shroud that hid them from the world, but also from themselves. Today, divers operating under private contracts have located at least 2 unidentified wrecks northwest of Bergen, matching the design parameters of the I&C vessels. Both are heavily corroded, their steel fused into impossible shapes, as if partially melted from within. No human remains have been found, but personal artifacts, dog tags, a rusted compass, and a ship's bell engraved simply Aegir suggest these were not experimental drones but manned warships. What truly happened during those final exercises in 1944 remains buried beneath cold saltwater and secrecy. Whether the fleet was lost to enemy attack, technological failure, or something stranger, the truth has been systematically removed from record. The Admiralty's final reference to the program appears in a single, redacted line of the 1952 Defense White Paper. All assets pertaining to maritime electromagnetic research, classified as I&C, are to remain sealed under perpetual restriction. In the end, I&C represents more than a lost fleet. It symbolizes an era when desperation drove innovation beyond moral or scientific caution, when victory at any cost blurred the line between defense and disappearance. The war ended, but the I&C never resurfaced. Somewhere beneath the Norwegian waves, an invisible fleet still lies entombed, its engines silent, its technology decades ahead of its time, and its story erased by those who once commanded the oceans to forget. Chapter 3. Project Helix, the Berlin Signal. In the winter of 1948, Berlin was a city divided not just by politics, but by silence. The ruins still smoked from the war's end, and within those ruins, the intelligence services of the world's new powers circled each other like vultures. It was there, amid the rubble of the Tiergarten district, that an unexplained radio signal emerged, an encrypted transmission that would confound cryptographers on both sides of the Iron Curtain and resurrect the ghost of a Nazi research program long thought destroyed. Project Helix. The signal was first intercepted on January 6, 1948, at 02:17 hours by the CIA's Forward Monitoring Station in Tempelhof. It appeared as a pulsing burst on the 6.7 MHz shortwave band, lasting exactly 47 seconds. The initial analysis suggested standard Soviet cipher chatter, until the station's lead technician, Lieutenant Charles Bowman, recognized the coding structure, a tripartite sequence once used by the German military's Abwehr unit during the war. Only this time, the transmission did not follow the expected Enigma patterns. Instead, it bore the unmistakable signature of an earlier classified program codenamed Project Helix, a pre-1945 Nazi research effort focused on neuroacoustics, frequency modulation, and psychological influence through directed signal. According to wartime German archives recovered in 1945, Helix had been headquartered beneath the Tiergarten bunker complex, overseen by SS Hauptsturmführer Dr. Ernst Keller, a physicist who specialized in electromagnetic resonance and cognitive conditioning. Official documents list Keller as executed by Soviet forces in May 1945. Yet the 1948 Berlin signal carried Keller's unique encryption identifier, a series of 3 repeating primes that had appeared only once in any recovered Nazi file, within Keller's personal transmission logbook. To both the CIA and KGB, This detail was impossible to ignore. Within 48 hours, both powers launched covert operations into Berlin's ruins. The Americans called theirs Operation Glovebox, the Soviets Vozduk 3. Both were tasked with tracing the origin of the transmission. What they found instead was a series of underground tunnels sealed by post-war debris, leading to sublevels of the former Reich Chancellery complex, rooms never recorded in Allied blueprints. Declassified Soviet field notes describe, partially, collapsed laboratories containing acoustic equipment, generator coils, and racks of burned documentation. One note, attributed to Major Ivan Morozov, states, "We found human remains strapped to chair apparatus, headphones melted to bone. Unknown purpose." By early February, both sides had suffered casualties from unexplained causes. Soviet WWII engineers reported sudden blackouts, vertigo, and auditory distortions while descending into the tunnels. American personnel from the Counterintelligence Corps described hearing voices on dead frequencies, whispering in German through inactive headsets. The official cause was chalked up to post-war structural hazards, but the overlapping symptoms between teams led investigators to a chilling theory. The Helix equipment had somehow remained active, generating low-frequency transmissions capable of inducing psychological effects long after the power grid had failed. The first decrypted Helix fragment emerged on March 12, 1948. CIA cryptanalyst Margaret Holloway identified a repeated phrase buried in the pulse intervals. Der Zyklus ist nicht beendet. The cycle is not complete. This phrase would later appear again, 2 decades later, in a shortwave broadcast recorded by an amateur radio operator in Munich in 1972, transmitting on the exact same frequency. The message was identical in structure, down to the millisecond. To intelligence agencies, it suggested not a random reactivation, but deliberate continuation. Files recovered from the US National Archives under the FOIA reveal that Project Helix originated in 1943 under the Arne Nerber's Department of Applied Sciences. Its purpose, to develop psychological countermeasures using sound and electromagnetic resonance with potential military applications in interrogation resistance and population control. One 1944 memo from Dr. Keller to Heinrich Himmler describes the potential to synchronize emotional states across distances should carrier frequencies be adequately stabilized. A chilling line follows. The mind can be made to echo itself. During the final months of the war, as Soviet artillery closed on Berlin, Helix's research team was ordered to destroy all prototypes and records. Yet, an intercepted telegram, sent from Keller's personal code to an SS communications hub in Dresden, dated April 27, 1945, reads, "Helix continues below. Power supply maintained through secondary relay. Initiate Phase 2. After that, no verified communication was ever recorded until 1948. Soviet reports indicate that at least one generator room beneath Tiergarten remained intact. Engineers found an operational capacitor array connected to an independent power source, possibly scavenged from subway circuits. When KGB technicians attempted to dismantle the machinery, several reported auditory hallucinations, including the sound of children reciting numbers and a male voice instructing to continue sequence. By order of the NKVD, the site was sealed with concrete, marked as a hazardous contamination zone. However, photographic evidence from 1949 shows military trucks removing unidentified crates from the area under heavy guard. Their contents remain unknown. In 1951, an internal CIA memorandum, Berlin Signal Case Study, Restricted, concluded that Project Helix represents a confluence of early electromagnetic research and psychological warfare development, elements of which may have informed both Soviet and American behavioral programs. Indeed, subsequent US efforts, such as Project MK Ultra, drew on intercepted Helix documentation smuggled out of Berlin by glovebox operatives. One glovebox report includes a haunting description. The frequencies are alive. Even when the devices are off, you can feel them hum behind your teeth. By the mid-1960s, Both nations had officially buried the Helix incident. But within classified circles, rumors persisted of continued experimentation. In 1972, the Munich radio broadcast rekindled fears that someone, somewhere, had reactivated the frequency. The recording, later analyzed by acoustic experts, contained spectral harmonics consistent with pre-war German transmission equipment. Embedded within the noise floor was a coded fragment reading Keller, B, possibly a signature or location tag. Berlin, once again, became the suspected origin. To this day, the source of the Helix signal has never been located. Attempts to triangulate the 6.7 MHz frequency yield inconsistent results, as though the signal itself shifts position, sometimes appearing in Berlin, sometimes along the Baltic coast. In 1983, East German Stasi reports documented civilian complaints of auditory disturbances and metallic echoing voices near former Nazi bunkers in Treptow. The regime dismissed the claims as Western propaganda, yet a classified internal directive ordered the immediate closure of surrounding zones, citing unexplained resonance anomalies. Project Helix remains a haunting intersection of science and paranoia, one where the human mind itself became the battlefield. Every few years, shortwave enthusiasts claim to capture faint pulses at the old frequency, identical to the 1948 pattern. Whether these are echoes, hoaxes, or remnants of an experiment that never truly ended is impossible to confirm. But buried somewhere beneath Berlin's concrete layers, the silence hums with memory. And the message, if one listens closely enough, is always the same. Der Zyklus ist nicht beendet. The cycle is not complete. Chapter 4, The Siberian Vault, Secrets of Operation Harrow. In January 1961, Soviet geologists surveying the permafrost near Novosibirsk Oblast stumbled upon what they first believed to be a Cold War munitions cache buried under the ice. The discovery came after a seismic reading revealed an artificial cavity roughly 40 meters below the tundra. Expecting to find remnants of early atomic test installations, the team instead unearthed something altogether more disturbing, a vast subterranean complex, constructed with German precision, bearing inscriptions in Gothic script. The insignia found on a rusted steel door left little doubt. Wehrmacht Forschungsamt. The research division of the German armed forces. Within days, the KGB sealed the site and initiated a classified investigation under the name Operation Harrow. The first excavation reports, now partially declassified through Soviet-era defectors, describe a labyrinth of reinforced tunnels lined with composite alloys unknown to post-war metallurgy. Among the artifacts catalogued were fragments of laboratory instruments, power conduits stamped Siemens 1944, and a series of crates labelled in both German and Cyrillic, a sign that the facility had been modified after the war. At the far end of the complex, investigators discovered a vault door welded shut, engraved with the phrase Sturmlicht Phase 3. The markings were consistent with Project Sturmlicht, a rumoured late-war German initiative focused on high-energy propulsion and atmospheric ionization, precursors to plasma-based weaponry. By Soviet order, all findings were transferred to the Kurchatov Institutes in Moscow for analysis. The initial field report, signed by Colonel Pavel Burov of the 2nd Directorate, classified the site as foreign origin research installation, possibly integrated with domestic atomic programs. Yet discrepancies emerged almost immediately. The construction techniques within the vault suggested two distinct architectural periods, one German, circa 1944, and one Soviet, post-1947. The overlapping modifications implied collaboration rather than mere occupation. This was anathema to official Soviet narrative. No public record was ever allowed to acknowledge that Nazi scientists might have continued their work on Soviet soil after Germany's surrender. And yet, scattered evidence told a different story. Among the documents recovered from the Siberian vault were maintenance logs written in both languages, referencing names unknown to any Allied or Soviet database. One entry, dated September 17, 1946, reads, Phase 3 reactor stable. Progress in containment promising. Awaiting new directives from Moscow liaison. The signature beneath, Dr. A. Keller, sparked immediate controversy among Western historians who later examined smuggled copies of the files. Could this have been Ernst Keller, the same scientist behind Project Helix? somehow recruited or relocated to the USSR after his supposed execution. The technical details only deepened the mystery. Soviet engineers described discovering a massive cylindrical chamber surrounded by copper-lined coils and quartz shielding, apparently designed to generate controlled bursts of high-frequency energy. The notes referred to this mechanism as Lichtkernapparat, light core apparatus. One schematic sketch, later translated by defector Dr. Leonid Myasnikov, indicated theoretical yields, equivalent to tactical nuclear output without radioactive residue. If true, it meant that by the late 1940s, the USSR had access to German energy research that even the Allies never fully understood. What happened next remains one of the Cold War's most tightly sealed secrets. In March 1961, shortly after the Vault's discovery, the entire Harrow investigation team, 21 personnel, was relocated to an undisclosed facility east of Omsk. Within weeks, all contact ceased. Internal memoranda between the KGB's 9th Directorate and the Central Committee referenced containment irregularities and environmental hazards at excavation site. Satellite reconnaissance decades later showed that the original coordinates of the Siberian Vault were erased from official maps, replaced with an artificial lake formed by controlled detonation. A few survivors from auxiliary teams later provided fragmentary accounts. One geologist, speaking anonymously in 1984, recalled that his instruments malfunctioned near the vault. The compasses spun endlessly. The air shimmered. It was like standing next to a living engine. Another witness, a Kurchatov technician, described hearing low vibrations, like distant thunder, emanating from within the sealed chamber before it was destroyed. They told us it was a structural collapse, he said, but it sounded like something waking up. Western intelligence agencies caught faint hints of Harrow through intercepted communications. A 1962 CIA dispatch from Berlin, subject, Siberian transfer material. References, unverified Soviet possession of advanced German plasma weapon research, designated Sturmlicht. Analysts dismissed the report as misinformation until, in 1977, Norwegian trawlers detected unexplained magnetic readings in the Barents Sea, readings identical to those recorded during the alleged Harrow tests. The data suggested field activity involving electromagnetic discharge on a massive scale. Further complicating the record are financial trails that appear to link the operation to post-war German industrial firms. Declassified East German economic archives reveal covert shipments of specialized machinery from AEG and Junkers facilities between 1946 and 1948, labeled as agricultural turbines, but matching the specifications for high-voltage magnetic containment units. These shipments were routed through Soviet-controlled zones, including sites near Novosibirsk. When confronted decades later, surviving engineers denied knowledge of their final destination. What makes Operation Harrow particularly disturbing is its political dimension. A KGB memorandum dated August 1952, now held in private archives, explicitly references the technical exchange agreement concluded in the closing weeks of the German conflict. The file suggests that before Berlin fell, elements of the SS had already begun negotiating safe passage and cooperation with Soviet intermediaries in exchange for research assets. If true, this would mean that Operation Harrow was not simply an act of post-war discovery, but the result of a premeditated handover. By 1983, rumors of the Siberian Vault's existence began leaking into Western scientific circles. Amateur researchers speculated that the Sturmlicht reactor represented an early attempt at directed energy weaponry, potentially influencing later Soviet experiments with plasma confinement and weather manipulation. The Kremlin, however, maintained total silence. When foreign journalists inquired about reports of a German facility beneath the ice, official spokesman laughed off the claim as science fiction, propaganda. Yet photographic evidence surfaced in 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union. Taken from smuggled KGB negatives, the images show vast tunnels lined with frozen conduits and machinery bearing hybrid Soviet-German labeling. One picture, dated February 12, 1961, depicts the open vault chamber moments before it was sealed. Standing in the foreground are uniformed officers, their faces blurred. Behind them, the faint outline of an emblem can be seen on the machinery, a double sigil of the Reich's eagle entwined with a hammer and sickle. In the decades since, the supposed location of the Siberian Vault has been swallowed by the tundra, leaving behind only conflicting testimony and missing pages from the Kurchatov archives. No verified samples of the Lichtknapperet remain, but small details persist. Unexplained radiation spikes detected in the 1970s, geomagnetic distortions, and whispers within Russian military circles about Phase 4 research rumoured to continue well into the 1980s. Whether Operation Harrow represented collaboration, coercion, or the continuation of Nazi science under Soviet command may never be fully known. What endures is the silence surrounding the event, a silence maintained by two superpowers equally invested in burying their shared inheritance. Beneath the permafrost of Novosibirsk, the steel bones of a forbidden alliance still sleep, wrapped in frost, guarded by secrecy, and echoing the hum of machines built for a war that never truly ended. Chapter 5. The Shadow Engineers of Peenemünde, April 1945. The Baltic air was thick with smoke and retreat. Soviet artillery pounded the remnants of the Third Reich's prized research installation at Peenemünde, the birthplace of the V2 rocket, the weapon that had once promised to turn the tide of war. Most of the surviving engineers, scientists, and officers were captured or absorbed into the rival Allied programs that would later become Operation Paperclip, and its Soviet counterpart, Operation Osoaviakim. Yet, among the thousands accounted for, 6 men vanished. Men whose names were erased from both German and Allied records, and whose final flight from the Baltic shore remains one of the most unsettling disappearances in post-war history. The last official Peenemünde transport manifest, dated March 27, 1945, lists a single aircraft, Flug B042, a Ju-290 long-range transport marked for evacuation under orders of SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler. The architect of Germany's secret weapons program, its stated destination was Prague, but the aircraft never arrived. Instead, scattered intelligence intercepts suggest that it diverted course toward neutral Sweden before vanishing over the Kattegat Sea. Soviet radar logs record an unidentified aircraft descending to low altitude before disappearing entirely from detection. For decades, the incident was dismissed as another casualty of war's end, until fragments of the Ju-290's fuselage surfaced in 1955 near a remote fjord in Norway, bearing serials that had been deliberately filed off. Inside the wreckage, divers recovered a weathered case containing engineering schematics and a leather-bound notebook written in technical shorthand. The language was German, but the diagrams were annotated in English. The cover bore the embossed initials HB, possibly Heinrich Bauer, a propulsion specialist known to have worked under Werner von Braun. But Bauer's official personnel file ends abruptly in March 1945, with no death certificate, no reassignment, and no post-war interrogation record. The Norwegian authorities handed the material to British intelligence, who quietly sealed it under File 471C Shadow Engineers. By the late 1940s, both Allied and Soviet analysts were aware that key Peenemünde personnel had slipped through their nets. A declassified US Army Counterintelligence Corps report from 1948 mentions unaccounted assets with advanced knowledge in guidance control and liquid fuel optimization, possibly transferred through private intermediaries. Another memo, labelled Operation Valhalla Annex, speculates that a network of industrialists in Hamburg and Munich facilitated their escape, using Red Cross papers and falsified contracts with neutral corporations. Yet, it is the post-war trail that truly unsettles historians. In 1956, French intelligence circulated an internal memorandum titled Les Fantômes de Peenemünde, The Ghosts of Peenemünde. The report alleged that several unidentified German scientists were working covertly within NATO-funded aerospace projects under assumed identities. One engineer, codenamed Helios, was linked to a research consortium in Toulouse specializing in atmospheric entry dynamics. Another, Sable, appeared in patent filings associated with inertial guidance systems identical in structure to late-war V2 prototypes. Despite photographic comparisons and handwriting analyses, none of these individuals were officially identified. The French closed the investigation quietly, under pressure from higher authorities. More evidence emerged from the Soviet side. KGB documents released in 1992 reference a classified effort to locate the missing Peenemünde 6, whom they believed had defected not westward, but east. A field report from 1950 describes a failed extraction, attempt in Istanbul targeting an intermediary, transporting documents, of German origin concerning advanced propulsion. The courier was killed before capture, and the documents vanished. Curiously, the same report contains a single handwritten note in the margin. They are working for both. This line encapsulates the enigma of the shadow engineers, that they may have played both sides of the emerging Cold War, offering fragments of their expertise to whichever power paid best, or perhaps ensuring that their ideas survived no matter who won. What little is known of their work suggests they continued refining Peenemunde's research into a new field entirely, automated guidance systems that would later become foundational to both missile defense and early space exploration. In 1964, an American aerospace executive privately confided to a Senate committee investigator that several patents his company licensed bore suspicious similarities to German, work long presumed destroyed and named no individuals but provided diagrams almost identical to those found in the Norwegian wreckage. When the investigator requested further information, the executive refused, citing national security agreements. 3 months later, he was found dead in what police ruled a car accident. Even within the US and Soviet programs, the shadow of Peenemünde loomed. Soviet engineer Sergei Korolev, in a private letter to a colleague dated 1958, lamented the continued influence of those whose loyalty is not to country, but to continuity. American scientists in Huntsville, Alabama, many of them paperclip veterans, spoke in hushed tones of an unseen group, consulting through intermediaries. In one NASA briefing from 1962, an anonymous note scrawled in the margin reads, "H. Bauer is alive. Do not ask where." The clearest glimpse into the conspiracy arrived unexpectedly in 1971, when a declassified West German industrial report revealed that the multinational firm Auer Werke had been quietly funding a private research trust called Stiftung Morgenrot, the Dawn Foundation. Its stated goal was post-war scientific rehabilitation. Yet the trust's internal ledger, leaked by an employee, listed large payments to untraceable accounts across Zurich, Lisbon, and Buenos Aires. The recipients' codenames matched those from Les Fantômes de Peenemünde. The foundation dissolved suddenly in 1973, its records seized by German federal police and never released. What connects all of these fragments is a single, cryptic document, an unsigned memorandum discovered in 1980 among NATO's restricted archives. Titled Directive Tantalus, it outlines the establishment of a shadow advisory network composed of non-aligned scientists tasked with maintaining parity between East and West in critical aerospace development. The stated objective: to ensure that no singular power achieves full dominion in upper atmospheric control. Beneath the final paragraph, written in faint graphite, appears the phrase, "Peenemünde continues, without a nation." By the end of the 20th century, the myth of the shadow engineers had become a whisper in defense circles, a half-forgotten story of men who transcended allegiance and ideology, carrying with them the secrets of the Reich's most advanced minds. Their designs influenced the missiles that defined deterrence, the spacecraft that reached orbit, and the systems that guided bombs through the skies of later wars. Yet no graves, no confessions, and no definitive identifications were ever found. In 2001, a private collector in Buenos Aires auctioned a cache of Cold War aerospace blueprints. One of them, labeled Himmelstreppe, Stairway to Heaven, matched the design lineage of Peenemunde's Type C V-2 rocket with modifications for long-range orbital deployment. The name scrawled at the bottom of the blueprint was unmistakable: H. Bauer. The document was purchased anonymously and has never been seen again. The legacy of Peenemunde's ghosts endures not in memorials or archives, but in the invisible architecture of modern technology, guidance systems, propulsion vectors, and classified innovations that still carry traces of their lost genius. They were the architects of destruction who became the engineers of deterrence, the nameless bridge between two empires. History remembers their teacher, von Braun, but forgets the shadows that moved beneath him, the ones who disappeared into the fog of surrender and reappeared wherever progress demanded their return. Some say they were hunted, others say they were protected, but every flight, every launch, and every weapon that traces its lineage to those last desperate months of 1945 bears their unseen fingerprints. The world they left behind was not one of peace, but of perpetual preparation, a world built by men who refused to choose a side because they had already chosen survival. The files remain scattered, their trails half erased, their witnesses long gone. Yet across the archives of Berlin, Moscow, Washington and London, the same names surface, buried beneath layers of redaction: Harrow, Helix, Leviathan, the Shadow Engineers. Each file points toward the same haunting possibility, that the Second World War never truly ended, only changed form. Behind every new weapon, every test site, every Cold War negotiation, echoes the same silent machinery of secrecy that began in the laboratories of a dying Reich. What else lies sealed in the vaults beneath Novosibirsk, or rusting at the bottom of the Baltic? How many hands shaped the modern world from the ashes of that war? Perhaps the next uncovered file will not just rewrite history, it will reveal that history itself was written to keep something buried.